What I found inside his wallet wasn't just a receipt. It was the first quiet crack in a marriage I thought was secure. That night felt ordinary in the safest way. The dishes were stacked in the sink. The television hummed low in the background. He had fallen asleep early on the couch, the way he often did after long days. I remember standing there for a moment, taking it all in, thinking about how settled our life felt. Comfortable, reliable, the kind of marriage people described as solid. I picked up his jacket to hang it back in the closet. As I lifted it, his wallet slipped from the pocket and landed softly on the rug. I sighed, bent down, and opened it without hesitation. I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't suspicious. I just didn't want anything important to get lost. That was when I noticed it. A receipt, folded smaller than the rest, tucked behind his cards. At first, it meant nothing. Hotels meant work, meetings that ran late, long days that blurred together. He traveled occasionally, and I had never questioned it. I trusted him. I always had. But something made me look again. The name of the hotel felt familiar. Not because we had ever stayed there together, but because I had driven past it so many times. It was close. Too close. My eyes dropped to the date, and my chest tightened. It was a Tuesday. Midweek. The same night, he told me, he came home exhausted and fell asleep before dinner. The same night I remembered clearly because I had made soup and carried it into the living room when he said he wasn't hungry. The same night I sat beside him, talking quietly while he stared at the screen, barely responding. I stood there longer than I should have, holding that receipt like it might change if I stared at it hard enough. I told myself I was overreacting, that I was reading too much into something harmless, that love required trust, not questioning, that marriages didn't fall apart over paper slips and dates on a page. So I folded the receipt exactly the way I found it, slid it back into the wallet, put the wallet back in his jacket, hung the jacket neatly in the closet. I told myself that was the end of it. But as I stepped back, something shifted inside me. A feeling I hadn't felt before. Not anger, not certainty, fear. I started noticing things I had ignored for years. How often he said he was tired. How frequently his phone stayed face down on the table, even when it buzzed. How he'd grown more affectionate in small ways, like he was compensating for something I couldn't see. None of it meant anything on its own. That was the problem. It only mattered when I put it together. That night, I went to bed beside him and listened to his breathing. Slow, even, peaceful. I stared at the ceiling, replaying that date in my head, wondering how something so small could suddenly feel so loud. I didn't sleep much, and by morning, I knew one thing for sure. Whatever that receipt meant, I couldn't unsee it. If you've ever noticed one small detail that changed how you saw everything, stay with me. This was only the beginning. I told myself I wasn't investigating him. I kept repeating that in my head, like a rule I hadn't broken yet. But once I started noticing the patterns, they showed up everywhere. I replayed conversations while folding laundry. I reconstructed entire weeks while driving to the grocery store. Dates I had once skimmed over came back sharper now. Excuses I'd accepted without hesitation began to sound rehearsed. Silences that once felt harmless started to carry weight. Nothing felt dramatic. That was the unsettling part. I checked our shared calendar one afternoon when the house was quiet. At first, it looked normal. Meetings, travel blocks, work obligations that made sense on their own. But when I laid them beside the receipt in my mind, gaps appeared. Empty spaces that lined up too neatly with the nights he came home late or not at all. I closed the calendar and told myself to stop. But the feeling stayed. I waited 2 days before opening the bank statements. Even then, I hesitated. It felt wrong, like I was crossing into something I couldn't return from. I told myself I was protecting our marriage by not looking. That lasted all of 10 seconds. Once the statements were open, my chest tightened. There were charges I didn't recognize. Not large enough to raise alarms. Not small enough to ignore. Midweek dinners at places we never went together. Parking fees in areas he rarely had reason to be. And then the hotel again. The same name. The same days. Always midweek. I stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. I wanted to believe there was an explanation I hadn't considered. Some detail I was missing. But the more I looked, the less room there was for doubt. I stopped sleeping properly after that. I woke up with my heart racing, convinced I had imagined everything, only to remember the dates all over again. I blamed myself for trusting too easily, for choosing calm over curiosity, for believing love meant not asking questions. I finally spoke to a friend. I didn't give details. I didn't say his name. I just said I felt like something was off, and I couldn't tell if I was overthinking or avoiding the truth. She listened quietly, then said something I didn't want to hear. She told me that once I went looking for certainty, I wouldn't be able to undo what I found. That answers came with consequences, whether I was ready or not. I nodded like I agreed, but I didn't stop. There was still one detail I hadn't allowed myself to sit with. The line on the receipt that listed 2 guests. Double occupancy. I tried to explain it away. Maybe a mistake. Maybe a default setting. Maybe something harmless I didn't understand. But deep down I knew better. The more I looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't carelessness. It was intention. He wasn't leaving clues behind by accident. He was covering his tracks just well enough to rely on my trust to fill in the rest. That realization hurt more than the possibility of betrayal itself, because it meant this wasn't a lapse. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't a moment. It was a choice. And once I saw that, I understood something else too. I wasn't searching anymore. I was preparing myself for the truth I already sensed was there. I just didn't know how much it would cost me once it was confirmed. If you've ever followed a feeling you hoped would disappear, you already know how this part feels. Stay with me. What I uncovered next left no room for doubt. The moment I confirmed that room was booked for 2 people, denial stopped being an option. I sat on the edge of the bed late that night with my laptop open, the screen lighting up the quiet room. My hands shook as I checked the booking details one last time, hoping I had misunderstood something, hoping there was still space for error. I went over the dates carefully. The room type, the number of guests, everything matched. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. There was no dramatic reaction. What I felt instead was emptiness, like something inside me had gone still all at once. It wasn't a single mistake. It wasn't a moment that got out of hand. It wasn't confusion or poor judgment. The dates lined up too well. The pattern was too consistent. This had been repeated, planned, managed. And once I accepted that, there was no way back to how things had been before. That was when it hit me that the marriage I thought I was in no longer existed. Maybe it hadn't for a while. I had been living inside a version of reality he maintained carefully, trusting that my belief in us would do the rest of the work. I thought about the intimacy we shared and realized how one-sided it had become. The conversations that stayed on the surface. The affection that felt familiar but distant. The way I had convinced myself that comfort was the same thing as closeness. Grief arrived quietly, not only for the betrayal, but for the life I believed we were building together. For the future I had pictured without ever questioning whether he was imagining the same one. For the version of him I trusted without hesitation. It felt like mourning something that had already been gone for longer than I realized. Anger followed, but it didn't consume me. It wasn't loud or chaotic. It settled into something sharper, focused, clear. I wasn't angry because he had feelings elsewhere. I was angry because he had made decisions that shaped my life without giving me a choice. He had allowed me to stay committed to a truth that no longer existed. That distinction mattered. I realized then that if I confronted him emotionally, he would control the conversation. He would redirect it, minimize it, reframe it in ways that left me doubting myself again. I wasn't going to let that happen. I decided I would confront him, but not in the way people expect. Not with raised voices or accusations. Not with tears or demands. I wouldn't give him the opportunity to rewrite the story before I finished telling it to myself. I planned everything in silence. I thought about where it would happen, when it would happen, what I would say, and more importantly, what I wouldn't say. I reminded myself that clarity didn't require explanation. Proof didn't need emotion attached to it. For the first time since I found that receipt, I felt steady. I knew the truth now. Fully. Completely. And whatever came next, I was done protecting a version of my life that no longer protected me. If you've ever reached a moment where knowing the truth felt heavier than staying comfortable, stay with me. What came next forced everything into the open. I didn't raise my voice when I confronted him, but the receipt between us said everything I didn't need to. We sat at the kitchen table late that night, the house quiet in a way that felt unfamiliar. I placed the receipt down gently between us. I didn't explain it. I didn't introduce it. I just let it sit there. He stared at it for a long moment. His face stayed still, but I could see the calculation behind his eyes. He knew what it was. He knew what it meant. Still, he waited, as if silence might soften what was coming. When he finally spoke, he denied it. Not forcefully, not convincingly, just enough to test whether I would accept it. When I didn't respond, he shifted. He said it wasn't what I thought, that I was reading too much into things, that work had been stressful, that he needed space. Then he minimized it. He said it didn't matter, that it meant nothing, that it was just a break from pressure. He told me it didn't change how he felt about me, that our marriage was still intact, that this didn't have to affect anything. Finally, he justified it. He said keeping it from me had protected us, that knowing would have hurt me more, that secrecy had been a way of maintaining peace. That was when something settled inside me. I realized he wasn't sorry for what he had done. He was sorry I had found out. I told him that what he took wasn't just trust. He had taken my ability to choose. He had made decisions that shaped my life while keeping me in the dark. He had allowed me to stay loyal to a version of our marriage that no longer existed. As I spoke, his responses grew shorter. Eventually, he stopped speaking altogether. The silence that followed wasn't relief. It was confirmation. That was when I understood something else. This wasn't a mistake he planned to correct. This wasn't a lapse followed by regret. It was something he had arranged carefully, believing my trust would shield him from consequences. He had no intention of stopping, only of continuing without being questioned. And in that moment, I knew I wouldn't be part of it. I didn't threaten him. I didn't bargain. I didn't ask for promises. I simply withdrew. Emotionally first. Completely. For the first time since this began, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. If you've ever realized that an apology isn't the same as accountability, stay with me. What I chose after this changed everything. Walking away didn't feel powerful. It felt quiet, heavy, necessary. For the first time, I stopped protecting someone who had been shaping my reality without me. I didn't announce it. I didn't threaten consequences. I simply stepped back. I told the truth to people I trusted. Not dramatically. Not in a way that demanded sides. Just honestly. I spoke plainly about what had happened, and how long I had lived without knowing. Saying it out loud made it real in a way silence never could. At the same time, I began pulling my energy away. I stopped smoothing conversations, stopped managing his moods, stopped explaining his behavior to myself and to others. I let discomfort exist without rushing to fix it. That alone changed everything. Once I stopped holding things together, his version of events began to weaken on its own. The stories didn't land the way they used to. The reassurances sounded hollow without my agreement behind them. I didn't correct him. I didn't argue. I didn't expose anything beyond what was necessary. I let truth stand where it belonged. Justice didn't come through confrontation or punishment. It came through clarity, through refusing to carry weight that wasn't mine, through understanding that consequences don't need to be enforced when honesty is allowed to breathe. In the weeks that followed, I learned things about myself that felt overdue. I learned that peace sometimes requires loss, that silence can become permission if you allow it to linger too long, and that trusting yourself isn't automatic. It's something you rebuild, one decision at a time. I moved slowly, carefully. I stopped rushing toward closure and let myself sit with discomfort when it surfaced. I paid attention to what felt steady instead of familiar. For the first time in a long while, my choices were my own. This wasn't the first lie I had ignored. It was just the one I finally faced. I could see now how often I had chosen calm over clarity, how many moments I had brushed aside because they felt inconvenient. That awareness didn't shame me. It grounded me. I wasn't broken. I was awake. And that changed the way I moved forward. If you've ever had to choose honesty over comfort, your story belongs here too. Share your thoughts and stay with me for more truths that deserve to be told. Sometimes betrayal isn't discovered through confrontation, but through the smallest details someone never thought you'd notice.